Starting the recording. Starting the broadcast in 3, 2,
1. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. This is Alan Shimmel, Editor-in-Chief of DevOps.com, and welcome to another webinar here at DevOps.com. Today's webinar is sponsored by our friends at PagerDuty, and happy to have what I think is going to be a great agenda and curriculum and a great guest for our webinar today. However, before we get started, though, we're just going to give some of the late arrivals, as we always do, a chance to log in here for a minute. And let me use that time to help those of you who may be new to our DevOps.com webinars, a quick tour of how you can interact with myself and our panel members today. We use the Citrix GoToWebinar control panel, or GoToWebinar system. Hopefully you see a control panel in your right-hand corner, for most of you, in your screen. A lot of different sections here within the control panel, but the one that I want to point to you or bring to your attention is the questions section. And if we hit the little caret next to the word questions, it should expand. And we already have some people putting comments in there. Someone says hi. Someone else wants to know what number can they call into. It should have been on your registration when you registered for the webinar. However, you can log in over or listen in over your computer as well, I believe, or phone. So hopefully that'll work. But this is your questions section, and it's open now. It'll be open throughout the webinar. I encourage you, if a question pops into your mind during the presentation today, to put your question in real time. We won't answer it right then and there. We have set aside time at the end for plenty of questions. However, this way you don't have to worry about forgetting you, like I often do. We are recording today's webinar. Slides, recordings will all be available within 24 to 48 hours. And we know that many of you listening in are from virtually everywhere in the world. And we appreciate you taking time out of your day, whatever the hour is, to stay with us, and you're all invited, of course, to listen in later as well. In addition to the question section, though, I wanted to also bring your attention down to the bottom of the control panel where it says chat. The chat section is great, especially if you're having questions technically, such as what number do I call, my audio's not working, or the slides aren't advancing. We do have a webinar engineer standing by who will help you with your questions and try to take care of any technical difficulties as best we can. So I encourage you to put your chat in there, or your issues around that in the chat section. Save the question section for questions for our panelists. That being said, we're already 3 minutes past, and it's time to log on here and let's get started. And welcome from Dublin, Ireland, and everywhere else of people logging on. So thank you so much. You can download these slides on DevOps.com probably by tomorrow. If we can go back to our title slide, though, Dave. Today's webinar is DevOps, more than just automation, and we're very lucky to have Dave Cliffe from PagerDuty. I'll tell you a little more about him in a second, and hopefully we'll learn a little bit about PagerDuty as well today. Before we do that, I want to give you all a quick overview of our agenda, Dave, and we're going to do an introductions of who our panel is today. And then we're going to jump right into why DevOps, right? And that may be a redundant or rhetorical question for some of you, and for some of you perhaps not. But we're going to talk a little bit about a shared operational responsibility, resilient systems and resilient people, situational awareness, and then hopefully, Dave, and I'm going to help, we're going to try to bring it all together and bring it home to you all so that you realize the value out of this. And as I said, we've set aside time for Q&A at the end. So let us start by introducing our panelist for today. And his name is Dave Cliffe. Dave is a product manager over at at PagerDuty. And Dave, what you want to introduce yourself, a little background?
Sure. I guess the most important thing about me is that I have 3 kids. So that picture there, you can see I'm clinging to my stroller. That's kind of my life as it is right now. So I'm on call for different reasons, I guess you could say, now that I'm not a developer myself.
Yeah, I've been there, Dave. They do grow up, and you're still always on call. But that being said, congratulations, three's a handful. And Dave, you're based in Toronto area?
You got it. Yeah, we have PagerDuty is primarily based out of San Francisco downtown, but we've got a thriving Toronto office here, and so I'm staring out the window at a whole lot of snow right now. So hopefully there's some people that can relate to that here.
Okay. All right, Dave. Why don't you? I'm going to turn things over to you. You've got the football, and why don't we get started?
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Alan. Appreciate it. Oh, all right. Why DevOps? Well, where do we start? Well, one of the things that we like to kind of go back to, and it's kind of a good reminder more than anything, is just seeing some of the Gartner research here around DevOps, and just this is kind of a quote from them, that DevOps will evolve from a niche to a mainstream strategy employed by 25% of the global 2,000. So, you know, hopefully, if you're listening in here today, you know, you may be, you know, coming from a very, very different perspective on DevOps. You may, you know, it may be something that's entirely new to you, or maybe you've heard some buzz about it, or maybe it's something that you've been doing and executing on for a while, or maybe it's actually, you know, you've actually had a kind of a DevOps initiative within your organization that has just gone terribly wrong. And really just didn't kind of pay off the way that you expected it would pay off. Now, I think the reality is that there are a bunch of benefits to DevOps and to actually adopting DevOps within your organization, and you know, it's interesting to see kind of that the Global 2000 is finally kind of stepping up and recognizing that, because you know, I'm a co-organizer of DevOps Days Toronto up here. You know, I've been involved in many of those conversations. PagerDuty itself is more of a startup, and so I think one of the pieces of reputation that DevOps has in many cases is that it's reserved just for these kind of, you know, largish tech companies or, you know, or startups, and really that's the only place that it fits in. You know, and as Gartner is kind of alluding to here, hey, this is actually a strategy that we're starting to see really well adopted in the enterprise. You know, DevOps Enterprise Summit has been a really great conference the last couple of years, and seeing how that really has started to be adopted at large. In kind of larger organizations as well as the small ones. And so what we really wanted to unpack with this, you know, what we launched as PagerDuty, we launched the site whydevops.com, which is really just a summarization of a bunch of the research that we've done, that we wanted to, more than anything, to supplement some of the other great research that has already happened. So, you know, we look at like Puppet's the State of DevOps survey that they do every year. That's just it's really fantastic data that comes out of that. Really a great resource from data mining. But we really felt like there was an opportunity to actually just supplement that a little bit and look at DevOps from through kind of a lens of incident response specifically, and look at kind of that specific operational aspect as an area that we think customers are seeing benefit from. You know, we think that the industry at large is seeing benefits from. So that's basically what motivated us to kind of go off and start down this path of commissioning a survey and getting some data from that. So, well, who ultimately did we talk to? Well, we talked to you know, we wanted a combination of not just kind of you know, the execs who are coming in with like, hey, I want this particular benefit in mind, and but also making sure that we got really good contributions from individual contributors, from people who are on the ground kind of executing and seeing what benefits DevOps actually had on them in terms of their day-to-day around incident resolution, resolving alerts coming out of their monitoring tools, all of that. We also wanted a good mix of company size. And so we were really looking for just again a good mix of this, everything from kind of some larger companies to more kind of SMB mid-market type mix. And so what we ultimately ended up talking to was about 670 IT professionals across all of these kind of different axes. And there were a couple of common themes that kind of jumped out right away, and hopefully these are actually pretty obvious. We miss alerts. 85% actually said they miss alerts, in one way or another, which is a little bit alarming, honestly, considering that everyone knows that a lot of these alerts actually do mean kind of that their uptime is suffering, and these customers themselves were actually saying, customers and non-customers were saying that this concept of downtime actually does affect my bottom line, and that's actually a conversation that we have with our customers quite regularly, or especially to kind of spark the conversation of what does downtime really cost you? What is it that that you're really paying for, and is there a way of actually quantifying that? And I realize it's a very nuanced conversation because your business is very specific to you. It's a very unique thing to you. You have your own metrics that you're responsible for, and so you don't want to look at just kind of availability as the metric, but you need to be able to effectively translate that into, okay, what impact did this actually have on my business? And so we try to help customers kind of talk through that, and some of them who are I would say further on the maturity spectrum, they've thought through this quite a bit. Others just haven't even broached the subject yet, and that's totally fine too. And so that's something that we are kind of consistently cognizant of when we're talking to customers is, do you really have a good measure of this? What we found ultimately from the rest of the survey is that probably a little bit unsurprisingly, but DevOps effectively does it better. That the organizations that had adopted more of a DevOps culture, we're starting to see some benefits from just the way that their organization had pivoted. And there were some very, very concrete things that came out of this. The first was that 31% of DevOps teams said they actually never missed critical alerts, and that was actually that was not entirely surprising, just because of the way that we've seen DevOps cultures grow, and seeing them kind of adopt some of these principles that we're going to talk through later on in the webinar, just around sharing operational responsibility and kind of who was responsible for kind of taking in that kind of operational response to monitoring tools and to all the feedback that's coming in. So the fact that there were some teams that were basically saying, yeah, you know what, we never miss alerts. We are the ones that are setting these up. We are the ones that are responsible. We are the butts on the line for them. That's effectively, that those teams were the ones that were the most successful at not missing them.
Sure. Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
First of all, not to interrupt you, I just wanted a couple of things. Number one, I forgot to mention, for anyone following along with Twitter or anything, or if you want to put something out there, we're using the hashtag WhyDevOps. So, and we're monitoring that as well. So if you have a question, you might want to throw it out there as well. Dave, I wanted to ask you, though, when I'm looking at the data from your survey and some of the Gartner stuff, maybe it's because I live in the DevOps echo chamber, but it just seems like so many more organizations are either have DevOps or multi-dimensional teams like this, or using DevOps in things like response and alerts. Do you think we're overachieving there, or do you think these like the Gartner kind of lines are sort of closer to true?
I think what we're seeing, to be honest, Alan, and is that DevOps in many cases paints a very, very rosy picture of what it can deliver, and I think what the data that we're seeing, it really does back up some of the really the strong positives that come out of that. But I think the flip side is that is that there are inherent problems that come out, and actually one of the points that we'll talk through a little bit later is just this idea of kind of situational awareness, and I think one of the areas that we've seen DevOps teams, as you start to kind of distribute responsibility out, you really start to see that not having that which is a really great place to start and dig in, but oftentimes they kind of stop there, and that's really just what DevOps is for, is just automating my deployment pipeline and kind of streamlining that process. But we really have seen that there's a lot of benefits beyond just that.
So, you know what, Dave, this is very similar to what we see when we do our surveys of our readers and stuff. And I like to say DevOps, though it may have narrowly at one point just been about that delivery pipeline, is sort of almost an umbrella term these days for the new way things get done. Right. And to that effect, what we see in our surveys is that people, because there's no clear definition of DevOps, right? It's muted. They take the Wikipedia definition of Dev plus Ops and all of that, because there's no generally accepted. A lot of times they do DevOps types of things, but they don't call it DevOps. And then other people will call it DevOps, but they're not really doing DevOps kinds of things. Right. So it kind of makes it interesting when you start looking at the numbers here like this.
It does become very hard to communicate around it, definitely, I think, Alan. Yep. We've seen that pretty regularly. I mean, one of the things that I like to, that I like to ask people who come to PagerDuty, who I'm interviewing for positions here, or certainly customers when I talk to them, is, what do you really mean by DevOps? And even that's, it's sometimes a difficult conversation, but I think in a lot of cases, what we've seen most commonly is that it is restricted to just, oh, DevOps, those are the people who automate my deployment pipeline. Right. We really do want customers to kind of be able to think beyond that and really start to embrace some of the benefits that come just from the culture shift that in terms of organizational thinking. And then seeing that implemented in incident response is actually, I mean, for me personally, what excites me the most, given that, again, I've been there. I was on the pager. That was my life at, working at Amazon in the past. Worked at Microsoft on Azure as well. And working as a developer, I mean, that was a reality. You were on the pager. Just kind of where, what life was like.
Agreed.
Yeah, but what we have seen definitely is, is that adopting some of these principles for DevOps, we see teams that aren't missing alerts as much. They're responding faster, so they're actually able to kind of get to issues much quicker, because there's fewer layers of actually getting in the way of different people trying different things before it actually got to them. And ultimately, the last 2 points on this slide, just around keeping stakeholders happy, keeping customers happy. I mean, as a product manager, that makes me smile. I really like that, and I say that not in a super hokey way, but I really one of the things that we as PagerDuty really enjoy is just the level of service that our customers are able to ultimately provide out, just as a result of getting to things quicker, getting the right person on the line quicker, being very transparent about communication, about what's going on. And I think, that's what we see out of these, these companies that have adopted more of a DevOps culture, is that, they are much more transparent about about critical incidents, being able to communicate with their customers about it, and customers are happier as a result. And so we talk about happier happy engineers and happier customers effectively, because you're hopefully less tired and not getting woken up for quite as many things, but you're also keeping your customers happy in the same way. So it's really kind of those two sides of the coin.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay, so well, great. There's a bunch of these benefits that come out of adopting DevOps in terms of making sure that you're processing alerts better, faster, that you're actually handling incident response better and communicating better. That's awesome. But I think what we've found, and certainly talking to the many customers that we have, we see very consistently that a lot of these DevOps practices within some of the larger companies, they aren't successful, unfortunately. They kind of go into them, maybe a little bit with a kind of a tool-centric approach, where we look at just the plethora of monitoring tools that people are using nowadays, and and they absolutely should have the ability to basically to use best-of-breed tools for those individual things, whether it's infrastructure level monitoring, network, whether you're looking at APM specifically, you're looking at mobile, you're doing kind of basic ping monitoring, web-based, or all of those log aggregation, all of those tools that are really necessary for understanding what's going on in production. I think are the reality is that there continues to be this kind of fragmentation and many people using many tools, and it's surprising in some ways that actually not as many customers, only 27%, are actually doing some consolidation of these alerts and kind of getting them into a place where you can actually kind of globally or centrally kind of understand what's going on in the system. And I think, again, what we found is that the tools are great for kind of getting started, and but really, I think that, as the phrase goes, the tools cannot fix your broken culture. I think that's fundamentally what this comes down to, is that a lot of what DevOps continues to push. If you look at the CAMs of DevOps, culture, automation, measurement, and sharing, really that the culture is what drives a lot of this change, and the tools really end up being kind of helping to enable that, enabling automation and better use in different ways.
Excellent.
All right, so let's talk about shared operational responsibility, because this is a term that we at PagerDuty use quite often, and we see our customers using quite often as well. And it's really just this idea that all these different parts of of effectively building a product for customers, that there's this this kind of continuous loop that you're going through in order to actually push out this value to customers and and maintain it and keep them happy. And at these agile transformations within within any organization, from the smallest of startups up to the largest, Agile really emphasizes kind of tightening that feedback loop, and we really think that comes out in DevOps in many different ways. But I think sharing operational responsibility is really putting the people on the line, putting the butts on the line, being the people who are actually responsible for building the product, right? So making developers responsible for code in production, and ultimately it improves quality. And I think that's the key, is that you tighten that feedback loop, and you're going to get better quality as a result of being able to effectively just be more agile in your response. And I go back to this quote that Werner Vogel's had. It's crazy that it's almost been 10 years since he said it now, but that concept of you build it, you run it, and this still isn't ubiquitous by any means, which is crazy. And if you actually go back to that interview, and I was at Amazon around that time when he said it, but he one of the things he said that I think is really interesting, right before you build it, you run it, he actually talks about how the making developers responsible for their code in production ultimately improves quality, and that's why they went down this path. Was that you actually got a better quality product out at the end by effectively making developers responsible in that way. And I think that in the organizations that we talk to, talking from a development mindset, again, I'm coming from being a developer myself, and as an application developer, I really had very little appreciation for things like instrumentation, for monitoring, understanding, scalability, and kind of distributed systems. Anything like that is not something that I would say I was classically trained to understand. And I really think it's kind of a shame in some ways, and something that is definitely a passion of mine, of just going back, talking with developers, and hey, I was in your shoes, and here's some of the principles that you need to think about. So it's from a development mindset. That's just what kind of rings true for me. Whereas on the operations side, I think what we see sometimes, which is I would say is unfortunate, and I think will continue to be a shift in operations mindset, is just really understanding customer value, understanding hey, this new release of the product, or these new changes that were pushed by the development team, here's the concrete value that these were bringing to customers. And I think being able to understand and actually measure that customer value, measure the kind of the metrics that matter to the business in real time on a regular basis, I think is something that when I speak with directors of ops or VPs or operations or CTOs, one of the questions that I like to ask myself is actually, what are the metrics that you're actually responsible for? And to be honest, a lot of the responses I get are availability. I'm responsible for availability, and that's it. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that that's seemingly where it seems to end, because I think that suggests to me a little bit that there's kind of a lack of understanding of, okay, what is the business, and what actually constitutes customer success with the product that you're using. I don't know, Alan, is that something that you see pretty regularly too?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the bigger picture though here is that what we see are this tension, if you will, between specific tools. So do you need a particular tool to do DevOps, or is the tool sort of secondary to the culture? And I don't mean to fluff up culture. It's really, really important, right?
Yeah.
And I've heard, and I'm more an observer, right? Unlike you, Dave, I wasn't a developer. I was not a developer. I didn't work at Microsoft or Amazon recently, or ever for that matter. And but I listen and I talk to a lot of people, and there's a certain, I think, feeling within the community that regardless of what tool I use, if I kind of get what DevOps is, we can do it, right? And
right.
Understanding what DevOps is, and not just DevOps in terms of continuous delivery or pipeline, but DevOps even in the terms of how you're defining it here, and how PagerDuty and their customers are using it. If we get that sort of way, right, the weirding way, or whatever you want to call it, leads us to the right tools, such as PagerDuty.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, Alan. I mean, I think fundamentally changing perspective on what you're responsible for, what your relationships are, how you work with others and collaborate, I think is just a really fundamental shift that as an engineer, I think is actually is a bit challenging, coming from a very very strongly analytical background, and really understanding, like, oh, hang on, in order to actually be successful, I need to work with these people in this way, or I think what tools do is they actually do help to kind of speed that process up a little bit, or they can, in that there's kind of less that you have to potentially build yourself. So I mean, in terms of like the tool chain that we use here at PagerDuty, I mean, we use Slack for chat, and I think that's a really foundational part of kind of really starting to broaden that collaboration, leveraging that for not just the engineering team, but also being able to communicate with, all the folks in marketing, all the salespeople, all of our support team, and then being able to effectively hook some of those things into to leverage customer feedback in interesting ways. So we have, whenever there's a feature request from one of our customers, that gets actually automatically piped through Salesforce and then pumped back into Slack, into a Slack channel that we can see. And it's those things, those types of things that I think tools are really good at just speeding that up and making it so that it's really readily consumable for people on the ground and kind of the day-to-day. And I think that's kind of where the tools really become key, is just kind of taking the cultural perspective, but then streamlining it and kind of making it flow into your actual day-to-day work.
Yep, agreed.
We take resiliency very seriously, and we really think that's a core part of reliability. And I think what we recognize is that notifications, while being kind of a pretty small part of the overall incident response, they're also pretty much the most critical part in terms of really getting the response going, getting the right people there.
Got it.
And so that's basically where we start, is kind of making sure that your core monitoring tools, that your core incident response platform, whether that's PagerDuty or whatever, really that just the reliability is such a crucial element of that, and that you're constantly looking for ways to eliminate single points of failure, and really when it comes back to the people, the people part is actually what I think is kind of the most interesting, because I think we as engineers, it's easy to focus on the systems. I got to make the systems reliable, but I mean, I can tell you, firsthand that at PagerDuty we went through a phase where, we only had effectively a single incident commander. We didn't really have a rotation built up, and if for whatever reason that particular person was unavailable, if he got hit by a bus, there's I think the concept of the bus factor is actually something that was coined, I believe, last year at DevOps Days New York, possibly, but something that definitely comes up pretty regularly in conversations. And we very much encourage customers to define escalation policies, make sure that that they don't have kind of a single person who's responsible for really every aspect of a particular area of their application. That's a critical part. So making sure that there's resiliency and redundancy in terms of the people that are involved is really important. That coming through okay, Alan?
Yes, fantastic, David.
Perfect. All right. So the last kind of main area that we want to talk about is just, I think, one of the things that I alluded to earlier, Alan, when we were chatting, just around kind of in these more kind of centralized operations type of companies that we talk to, who have these potentially large-scale NOCs that they've used traditionally. I think one of the benefits that model has is very much understanding kind of large-scale situational awareness, and you've got kind of a constantly somebody on duty who's looking at a screen that effectively understands kind of the breadth of the system and understanding kind of system-wide knowledge. And I think one of the areas of DevOps in sharing that response, that operational responsibility, you end up with very much a distribution of operational load, which is very obviously beneficial, as we talked about, for feedback loops and everything. But frequently it leaves you in a place where one team is working on one thing, another team is working on another thing. They happen to be actually related problems, and they just really don't know it. Or you've got just one team working on something that's completely irrelevant and in comparison to something that might be going on at a different part of the system. And so understanding, systems of record, and there are a lot of really great systems of record out there. Anything that you can do to effectively aggregate alerts into, into a single view and be able to actually see that is just really, just incredibly crucial for large-scale incident response. And I think what probably even the more important part of that is as you start to distribute this operational responsibility out to the individual teams, I think one of the things that can happen with each of the teams is that they start to lack that system-wide awareness, but they also start to lack a little bit of a focus on really what are the core business metrics that are responsible. So taking a more concrete example, imagine if you have say 40 microservices in your architecture, and you've got maybe say 8 different teams that are responsible for maintaining those 5 microservices apiece. It's oftentimes very hard to actually have one of those particular teams responsible for for specific business metrics like transactions per second that are potentially traversing a bunch of different microservices within that architecture. And I think that's one of the things that we highly encourage our customers to understand and to alert on effectively is leverage business metrics. At Amazon, we looked at things like orders per second. If orders per second dropped by any particular amount within a particular threshold, that was cause to actually page someone. Didn't know who was responsible necessarily, but it was a good indicator from a triage perspective of, hey, something bad is happening in the system, and we need to immediately kind of track down what's going on. In PagerDuty context, we do the exact same thing for notifications in our pipeline. So if we see any sort of decrease in the notification throughput of our pipeline, we know that there may be something going on with it, whether it's related to a particular service in our architecture, or it's something that's due to our platform, where we host in AWS and Azure, whether or not it's something on the operational side with networks and load balancers, or if it's something on the specific application side. That's immediately what we kind of jump to getting those people on board, trying to track down exactly what it is that's misbehaving within our application, and really just understanding the customer in those situations, understanding for the purposes of triage, like how bad is this? How many people do I potentially need to wake up for this type of thing, is really crucial for incident response.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, let's bring it all together here, Alan. I think kind of in terms of where PagerDuty fits into the picture, we look at effectively people, process, and tools as really three kind of distinct areas that we try to tie together. So we're looking at people, obviously in terms of distribution of responsibility from an operational perspective. We look at giving them the platform effectively to communicate and collaborate on incidents and alerts in the system, and effectively starting to give some good metrics, effectively give some good metrics as to what it is that are actually relevant metrics for the team in order to understand health. And so effectively the people are kind of a really core part of the PagerDuty as a product, just understanding our users, understanding how they organize themselves, and especially in a firefight in particular, and understanding kind of just what is the long-term impact on the team. So looking at who's being responsive, are people being overloaded, are they getting too many incidents over a particular period of time, or waking up too many times in the middle of the night, God forbid. So that's really kind of a core part of the people. When we look at the process, it's really just helping you to automate the parts of your incident response that make sense effectively, and being able to leverage some best practices in terms of how you set up your schedules, how you set up escalation, how you get people involved in kind of a larger scale incident response. And then the tools aspect is really just how we integrate all of these different tools together, and effectively just, really what we're there for is to kind of provide a good platform for, for tools to be integrated into us in good ways, so that we kind of provide that situational awareness for you. So that's how we fit in.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So there's a nice chart there. I hope people get that.
Yeah, this is again just a different representation, kind of the people, process, and tools. So effectively taking all the tools, pumping them into PagerDuty, providing a good platform to automate some process there, and then connect it up with the right people.
Got it. All right, Dave. Why don't we got a little sidetracked here with the audio, but I think we're on time, and we've got plenty of time for questions, which is good. I'm going to try to grab some questions from the people who typed them into the box. Before I do, though, I wanted to just say we did get a little question from our internet Twitter followers, and so just quickly, Dave, can you give an example of tools used to enable DevOps in the enterprise or in enterprises?
Yeah, tools that we've seen used. I think chat collaboration is probably the one that I'd start with, and having a really good kind of communication between developer and operations, I think is just a really key place to start. I think traditionally tools like IRC that are used by a lot of operations teams, but aren't they aren't in many cases actually adopted by their engineering counterparts in the kind of application development. And so if you're immediately having to, I would say, filter your communication through something like a ticketing tool, I think that's just a wrong, just not a great place to be, unfortunately. I think a lot of the communication and collaboration that needs to happen has to be a little bit lighter weight, I guess, is probably what I would say. And so leveraging a good chat tool, I think, is a really key part of this. I mean, other tools that I would recommend in bringing DevOps in. I mean, I really think one of the points that I probably didn't emphasize enough is just examining the role of the operations team and how that's changing. So, I talked about shared operational responsibility and how valuable that is to kind of get development teams on, but I probably didn't talk a little bit enough about how that impacts the operations team. And I think what we see consistently now is almost that operations becomes almost like a dev tools team, I'll say, or at least partially becomes kind of a DevOps or a dev tools team, where they're really responsible for providing a really great platform, in terms of the continuous integration tools and continuous deployment tools that really just enable the rest of the engineering organization to be successful. So really, whatever it takes to kind of build yourself a really great set of tools there, whether it's using things like, Puppet or Chef to do some, a little bit more kind of configuration management. We've used tools like Travis. We've started using a tool called GoCD ourselves, and that's been really successful so far, just in terms of really just streamlining that pipeline and making that communication between between operations and development pretty effective. But also, like I said, more than anything, making it so that operations is providing more of like a self-service platform for developers to leverage.
Yep. Excellent. Next question was, how do SecOps and DevOps intersect? So Dave, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a shot at that one, as it's kind of my specialty.
Sure.
So, as someone who spent almost 15 years in the security InfoSec space, one of the things we always lamented in security is how come we always get bolted on after the fact? Why don't they call us in earlier when we could have done something? And, studies have shown that a good code review, for instance, pre-deployment is 10x more efficient and cheaper than code review post-deployment and then going back and making changes. So when we build security into the whole development and deployment process, it just works so much better. It really is kind of the best hope for security. So SecOps and DevOps intersect there by shifting security left earlier into the development process. And for anyone who's going to be at the RSA conference in 2 weeks, the end of February, beginning of March, Monday of RSA week, we here at DevOps.com actually do produce a one-day event at the Moscone Center along with the RSA conference folks called DevOps Connect Rugged DevOps. And we have an amazing lineup of DevOps and SecOps, if you want to call it that, folks. We try to bring the DevOps tribe and the security tribes together for sharing tribal knowledge. So if you're in San Francisco, you just need any RSA pass at all to get in, and we do have free RSA passes for the expo, which you'll use all week, but it'll get you into our event as well. You can get that on devops.com. So now let's return to some questions, though, if it's okay, Dave.
Yeah, sounds great.
So a couple of questions were regarding along the definition of DevOps, and I think you and I have kind of hit on it. I'm not sure if we can get any better to it. But here's another question, and this was kind of interesting. Does DevOps apply to iOS and Android enterprise app development? Dave, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, I mean, we ourselves have iOS and Android apps, and so I think a big part of of just agile development is certainly being able to execute under some of the parameters that exist there. I think it's unfortunate in some ways, and I know that mobile, I would say mobile betas and that kind of technology has actually come a long way, and it's actually really good to see because I think one of the things that really held for such a long time was the fact that you were constantly blocked from actually trying to tighten up that feedback loop in any tangible way by the fact that you needed to go through this kind of ridiculous approval process in order to actually make your apps available. And so I think that's actually one of the big parts that that has really enabled kind of I talk a little bit more about kind of agile development in iOS and Android because I think the support cycle is really interesting there in comparison to in comparison to probably maintaining more of like the back-end systems that back up some of that data. So I think it's maybe less applicable on the actual kind of development side, but certainly from like a back-end systems perspective, I could see it applying really squarely there.
Absolutely, and I would just add that in some ways mobile development for iOS, Android, what have you, is almost tailor-made for DevOps, right? Because these are basically SaaS type of apps for the most part that are getting updated. I know continuously is a good word. I don't know if it's 100% apropos, but and so that whole kind of feedback loop, continuous improvement, continuous deployment, they're all tailor-made for a mobile app or a mobilized world as we live in. And to me, mobility and mobile app usage, the rise of mobile devices, is one of the mega trends that really push and pull everything we're doing in technology today, along with the cloud, along with big data, mobility, and ubiquitous connectivity. And is DevOps an enabler of those megatrends or a byproduct of those megatrends? Is probably a great topic for another webinar. That being said, we do have a DevOps a snap look at mobile development trends in DevOps, and it should be available sometime later this month or early next month on the site. Got a nice series here from a fellow named Kevin Fisher, and his contention is Dave, that DevOps should be confined by outcomes, but what are the outcomes that we should, judge it by? How can companies best measure DevOps performance, and how does it tie to financial performance? Would you like to try that one, Dave?
Yeah, I can touch on a couple of the metrics, and again, I think one of the big things, going back to one of the points that I tried to emphasize around just really having operations really understand kind of what those business metrics are that they're continuing to drive towards. I think that's a really important metric to understand. Just operational health of the system, even more so than things like SLAs and availability and that kind of thing. So I think that's one part of it. I mean, other outcomes. I mean, I think the Puppet state of DevOps, they again talk a lot about like frequency of deploys and that sort of thing. I think those are interesting.
Adopting DevOps. So sort of that DevOps team approach, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I mean, definitely, I don't know if you could attribute this necessarily just to DevOps, or if this is or if the the Agilistas would kind of call this more of a more of an agile thing. But that idea of just understanding cross-functional teams and really just I guess the concept of like T-shaped people, right? People who are very, very deep, maybe in a particular area or a couple of different areas, but then at least have a little bit of breadth across a bunch of other areas, I think are really important. And we certainly benefited from that at PagerDuty, where we don't have like a traditional kind of DBA type of role or a traditional traditional like network operator or anything like that. I mean, we have effectively almost entirely fully cross-functional teams that own their stack very close to top to bottom, and I'd say that's a trend that we've seen very regularly now. Is is in microservices architectures, you're starting to see rather than kind of these large cross-cutting databases that are responsible for a bunch of different applications, you start to see kind of some chunking out of those individually, and microservices actually having kind of their own databases, their own cluster kind of responsible for that particular microservice. And then the communication happening kind of just via particular service calls, or actually queuing patterns and those sorts of things. So I think the responsibilities of the team, we're definitely seeing as a pattern, and the number of kind of cross-cutting things, what was traditionally like you'd have a system layer of all your hosting, you'd have a network layer, you'd have database layer, then you'd have maybe the application tiers kind of built on top of that. We're starting to see that very much dip down, and the cross-functional teams be responsible for a lot more of that in terms of the vertical slice.
Yep, absolutely. On that note, Dave, we're 2 minutes past the hour, and I apologize. I know people are busy and have other things to do. We'll need to call it a wrap on today's webinar. Dave, thank you so much for appearing today and fighting through like a good DevOpper should. Any kind of, technical difficulties. We look forward to having you again on another DevOps.com webinar here in the future. Also, many thanks to PagerDuty for sponsoring today's webinar. We hope you found it useful. We will have slides, questions, and everything else up in about 24 to 48 hours. Until then, though, and until our next DevOps.com webinar, which we hope you'll join, this is Alan Shimmel, Editor-in-Chief, DevOps.com. Thanks for joining, everyone, and speak to you all soon.